to looking at the way technology is changing art and how it's financed, insured and valued as an investment. And leading the conversation today is Chris Bentley from AXA XL, who I'll now hand you over to.
Yeah, go in.
Thank you very much. We've got pretty limited time for this. Some of it was stolen by the previous speakers, like an aggressive large language model taking the reproduction rights for certain images. We'll get straight into this. We're talking really about the investment strategies that can help the younger companies in the art tech space evolve in a way that sort of Curtis has just articulated as being necessary. So rather than introducing each of you, what I'm going to do is ask you one by one, if that's okay, to just say a very brief few words about your business and what it does and how it's evolved from the very, very beginnings to what it is today. So just very quickly, let's start with Annika.
Thank you, Chris. So I am Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of Articheck. And I used to be a museum restorer at Tate 15 years ago when the iPad was launched. And we happened to be having a day devoted to how we can streamline our conservation documentation processes, which were extremely painful and analog. And so this is when I first thought about, we should have a digital solution for this. It would be streamlined, it could be standardized. We could all be singing from the same hymn sheet internationally. Maybe I won't have to get handwritten notes in 3 different languages for a legal document that I have to sign in future. Wouldn't that be nice? So, I had a lot of pain that I felt and a vision for what I wanted to do. My initial motivations were to give the gift of time back to conservators who could actually do some conservation treatment, because at the time I had no time to do treatment, and that was very frustrating. I had to just document condition of artwork and say what I would do if I had time to do something, which I never did. So that was not ideal. And so that was the initial kind of motivation. I realized in my R&D process that actually most people making condition reports in the world are not conservators. They are everyone else in the ecosystem, and they could use a guided approach because they've never necessarily even had training on how to do this. And this is all about risk management, right, of artwork. Its key points of risk is in transit, and that's really when most condition reports are done, is for the purposes of transaction, for transit, for loans, and touring exhibitions. And so that was the original goal. Fast forward, 15 years, we now have millions of reports in our system. We work with around 400 different organizations globally, and we are supporting 8 different languages, and we now have about 25 people on our team. So, lots of changes. For a long time, it was initially, I would say, until even a couple of years ago, it was really, really fucking hard. It was like there was 4 or 5 of us. We were scrambling. We were just doing our best, holding on for dear life. I've done, several rounds of funding. I guess we're going to get into that in a minute. But, it was definitely a marathon and not a sprint. It doesn't follow the traditional startup model. And so there's a lot of challenges around all of that and just surviving. But one of the key things for me now in terms of my vision certainly has expanded from those days. I now have a lot of data. I have the world's best database around condition of art, and I want to think about, how to leverage that for the likes of insurance for, many of the different key players, and I think that is, where we're headed and what's really important, and I completely agree with everything that both panels have talked about. I'm involved in an AI ethics group called BoardWave. I think it's a very important subject. And I also believe very strongly in collaboration as a way to get there, and infrastructure building is key. And if you're going to be starved of funding and have this tiny company, my company's had very heavy lift over time, but there's no way that I can build infrastructure for the entire goddamn market. I'll just leave it there.
I feel the passion of the build as well, you know, which I can empathise with. I'm Charlotte Stewart, the managing director of MyArtBroker, which is actually a company that's been around for 15 years, primarily as a Banksy print brokerage. But really, it's only in the last sort of 5 to 6 years that we have scaled dramatically with technology, because we're not an invested company, and there was a moment in the business to be able to invest in ourselves, and that's really our journey. We specialise in prints and editions, and we have built a network marketplace. My background is Christie's Auction House, which 15 years ago I was part of actually the print marketing department. And so I have, and a business manager for prints and multiples and wine. And so the editions world and the movement of, what we call the historians running the ship, has pretty much been my entire life to where I am now.
Curtis.
Can you hear me now? All right. I think I'm, from Annika's perspective, I'm almost the opposite. I was pure audacity when I entered in the market. I had a Jerry Maguire moment at a conference, at the Authentication Art conference, and I told all of the VIPs in the room that they were all going to fail unless they put a unique ID on every single work of art in the world. And I thought I was running away from the art world, and that was my parting gift. And then they gave me a standing ovation, which was unexpected, and somehow lured me into starting this company. I'd come from, my last job was basically reforming the entire floral supply chain in the US. We tracked and traced every single cut flower coming to America, all the way to the end consumer. And we shouldn't have been able to do that, but I didn't know I wasn't allowed to, so I just started asking people and made it happen. And so for those of you that ever received a package on Sunday, that's my fault. Valentine's Day in 2010 fell on a Sunday, and we went to FedEx and said, how about we put 80,000 packages in your network and deliver only for us? And they did. And then UPS came back the next year and said, could you do that for us as well? So when I entered the art world, it wasn't, I wasn't planning on changing much at all. But as I got here, it occurred to me in the end that the art industry had problems that I knew a lot about. And the most basic is, where was your art, and is it okay? So we went from this notion of trying to create a database and putting a unique ID on every single work of art in the world, and to some degree we backed off and said, oh God, your problems are smaller and earlier than I thought. So we focused on just solving really simple problems, and then allowing other people, like Annika, like Nikki Stowe, Kay and others, to actually specialize in what they're really good at, and put ourselves at the center and be a bit more sort of a hub of data for everybody, so that we could make it easy for everybody to integrate. And we basically had the audacity to work with everybody and say, maybe you just integrate with us once and we can introduce you to everybody that's doing the right thing.
This is losing connection.
Great. Let's move on specifically to investment strategies then. So we can start with you again, please, Curtis. How have you raised money over the course of your business's life, and have you done that all privately? Was there a point at which you wanted to first allow in outside investment? What prompted that? It would be great to hear sort of the journey you've been on with investment for Authentify.
I would not have done what I'm doing had I not done an exercise in Excel that realized that this could be $1 billion business doing very basic things. And as soon as I said that, there was no way I was going to fund it. I funded it a lot more than I wanted to. It was supposed to be very big and be very easy to bring people in because it was obvious. You did the math, it was very simple, the ROI was there. I hate venture capital, they all suck, because they don't know anything about art and they walk away. This is the greatest blue sky opportunity I've ever seen, and they're like, I don't get art, good luck. So I have raised money from my friends, my family, my friends' friends, my family's family, my friends again, people that don't really want to be my friend anymore. And we're finally moving to some serious family offices because they actually get art, they own art, they know how messed up it is, but they see the opportunity. But for anybody that's here, I have no intention of bootstrapping it. I'm a 54-year-old man that doesn't want to do that, and I've done it for 10 years. So, and this is sort of my complaint. It's like, this is an amazing opportunity. There's so much to do. There's so many talented people that can be brought into this. Stop making us starve. Allow us to do what we do incredibly well. Allow us to grow the industry for you. Bring the money to us. I have an Aeron chair that I got from like 4 startups ago for $5. We don't spend money unnecessarily. I'm in San Diego, I'm not Silicon Valley, so we just wear flip-flops. I think the notion is like, this should be investable. We need to find a better source of money. And I think for everybody I see on the stage and the people here, you're making us starve unnecessarily to do amazing stuff. We could move faster.
Charlotte, you sort of touched that your approach has been different to that. Could you expand?
Yeah, I hate VCs too, by the way, so if you anyone love them. I work very briefly between Christie's and MyArtBroker, 4 VC companies actually, who came to me basically to say, like, does this seem like a good idea? And what I really noticed was they didn't really know. No one really knew. There was no communication between. There's no good communication or helpful communication in my experience. I'm sure there's some really good examples between investors in VC where they've got a handful of different businesses. Like, whether or not your passion project fails or not is not really what they're thinking about when they're eating their cornflakes in the morning, like it is for you. Our approach has always been to develop iteratively against profit, and it's really hard. Sometimes it's great, and you do some of the swing from month to month, feeling like, now we're going to build it, now we're going to build that next thing, because there's a huge roadmap, one that is partly just in our heads as the insider founders up there who wakes up every morning with a new idea. It's exhausting. But what we really actually enjoy is being able to build it. I know that sounds quite primary school probably to a lot of people who have taken on huge investments. I sort of find myself torn between, if we were going to go for investment, it would be with one of our big sort of advocate collectors who have worked with us for a long time and who have already shown interest in being a bigger part of the business. And it's a real catch-22 for us, because there are so many things that we could do much faster. There's something in MyArtBroker, in our very DNA, of being quite hustle, and being able to go, okay, this is what Q4 looks like. This is what Q1 next year looks like. This is we talk about this kind of Art Market 2050. I think we're on the same page, Louise. I'm really sorry. I hope that's not going to derail the brand too much. But what I find amazing about planning tech, whether it's through investment or not, is we don't. We all are sitting here in this room. We're all quite a different group of people, I think, that came to ABC a couple of weeks ago, and I love that. But I almost feel like they should all be forced together. Like we should all make everybody go into both rooms. Because we don't realise how quickly or how slowly this market is moving. One of the things I'd love to talk about is the fact that actually it was in the 1970s that the first artwork sold for over £1 million. And then fast forward to Beeple selling for 69 million. Some things do move fast, but they tend to spike and then drop. And that's the kind of the problem, again, with investment. It's if you're, even if you have an investor, it's not like you've got this long, beautiful plan, is it? The market changes all the time. And with our own investment, we're able to go, okay, had a great quarter, let's spend on that. We're a lot more careful, I think, than I would be with how we invest and what we build. And we're very iterative. We test, we build, we test, we build. And we speak to our collectors all the time. I think it would be quite easy to take on a large amount of investment and then shut ourselves away and build like crazy, and I think that's quite a dangerous thing to do.
Annika, you started talking about your investment strategy, but can you now expand as well, please?
Sure. Well, I think I'd like to also respond a little bit to what Charlotte said, because I totally hear you, and I also think that in some ways bootstrapping for so long has demanded rigor and has made us have very strong muscles of, my board has always applauded my ability to husband the cash, which I've had to do, but it's also just can be very distracting, and it also can mean missing opportunities, and there has to be something between kind of hemorrhaging millions and millions and spending like crazy, and this sort of like, we've got 18 months runway, we have to spend it, we have to have traction, we have to get more money, we have to show something for those 18 months so that we get more money, otherwise we're going to have to like fire all the 50 people we've just hired. And I agree that is not really a model that will work for the art world, because there's only so much artificial acceleration that you can do in this space. It's slow. It's always going to be slow. And so there is an element of, you shouldn't just spend like crazy because you're just going to crash and burn. And so there is that. But on the other hand, if you're constantly starving and you're constantly distracted by it, that's not really good for anyone, for your business, for growth, for your shareholders, for the market either. So, we have to find some kind of middle ground where we can take hold of opportunities that come along, and we can capitalize on them. And yes, we can build some much needed infrastructure so that we can, build a better future for this market. Because, I asked you at the recent conference during your talk, is it broke now? Can we fix it? Because, people have been saying it ain't broke, don't fix it, for as long as I've been in this market.
It's broken.
Thank you. So if we sort of accept what Curtis said in the talk leading up to this, do we think then that there is an optimal investment strategy more broadly across the art tech space that would help bring about that moonshot? Is it investment strategy or some coherence of investment strategy that is part of what's missing and holding back the market at the moment? Charlotte?
I was just thinking about that question, and I was thinking it's different for everybody, I think. But I hear you, Annika, like that like, what's the point? You're just taking up so much of your creative energy and strategy involved in actually just balancing the bleeding books when you know that you're going to get somewhere.
Check the volume in the room.
For us, and it is discussion. Like, I know I sit here today as probably someone who
I think it's fine now, but
grown it ourselves, and but there is a lot of discussion internally all the time about investment. I think for us, it's a little bit, I don't want to call it control, because I feel like that sounds non-collaborative. And I'm really up for collaboration, and I think collaboration is a real problem in the art market. I think competitors like fight fiercely, and actually we should all be working, particularly in the tech area, much closer together. But I think it's about finding somebody or an entity that is really closely aligned to your mission, and I think that's where there's just such a spectrum of investors, and for us it would have to be probably a kind of non-industry party that was deeply passionately involved in this area, because strategically from an investment strategy perspective, it's going to allow you to move with the market, it's going to allow you to pivot and be relatively agile, which we've always been, which I think is necessary for a company like MyArtBroker.
Thanks. Annika?
I think there are a lot of challenges. I just mentioned about, the VC playbook doesn't really work here. I have a lot of angels in terms of my investor group. But for most businesses, there comes a time when that doesn't feel as appropriate anymore, at least, for most people's models. There's a question now, I just had a shareholder brunch a few weeks ago in which we talked about, debt and, just borrowing money, although of course at very high interest rates, but that can be preferable to giving away more equity. That's an option and often part of the mix. But one thing I would love to find is, shareholders that have a longer term vision than just the 3 to 5 year exit,
it's down.
who are, understand the opportunities and the vision. And maybe that's a fund like Curtis proposed. One thing I will say is I absolutely think that there has been a lack of vision and financial investment by the key stakeholders in this space. I don't think anyone can argue with that statement, and it's a shame. And I think if we had external people coming in, I agree with the notion that if there were at least some players in the market who had some vision and some investment willingness, then that probably would attract outside people to say, oh, maybe this is an interesting, maybe it's not too niche, this market, maybe it could be interesting. Because at the moment, outside investors, we don't do things properly. We can't manage due diligence. How are we going to manage fractional ownership?
Can I just add to that as well, though, because I think one of the problems, I often say, we don't really have a tech problem as such in the art market. We have incredible people building, but we have a trust problem. And that reverberates into exactly what you're talking about, because, some of the sort of, for instance, the 4 major auction houses, or 3 major that have spent a lot of any money on technology in the past sort of 5 to 10 years, they've all had these ideas. They've all been discussed internally. They've built things. I started at Christie's when we still had a black screen, by the way, and green writing on it, and it was a property system. And this, something that's really quite enjoyable to remember. You would type it in, and it would flash at you as it goes. That they didn't move that on until sort of 7 years after I started there. It was still hanging around in the back. This is you're absolutely right. Like, as soon as bigger giants within the secondary art market in particular, start moving towards, but they have a little bit, but they never put enough trust into the concept of it. It was more like, we'll put a little bit of money into that, see what happens. And then it turned out that actually even just things like the product roadmap weren't thought about properly. Collection management systems like we run were sort of scoped out on a piece of paper and then bought externally. There isn't like if we're going to do this, we're going to need a whole division to do it. We're going to have to put proper investment into it ourselves. And I think that's because the key people don't necessarily trust the process. They still believe that there is a buddy system almost working uniquely in this market. And there still is, by the way, there still is that system that needs to be respected. And I think that's the problem. We almost feel like there's 2 poles and nothing in the middle.
When I went to the floral industry, I'd come from the chicken evisceration business, and I'd come from the financial business before that, and I'd come from others on and on and on, combustion engineering before that. And when I talked to my team, and I said, who's been outside the floral industry, and nobody put up their hand. And that was my first moment of, oh shit, they don't know what the rest of the world looks like. And I had the audacity to come up with a 7-year technology plan for our back-end systems. And people said, we don't even know what we're doing in 6 months. But I did know, because it was a natural progression this company was going to go through. How they sold, where they did, yeah, that could change. Features could change. But the fundamentals of the data architecture, of where we're going, how you manage inventory, how you manage vendors, how you did this has been solved over decades. And people who implement ERP systems, there's best practices. These things exist. And I think when I come in the art world, it's very similar. There are not that many people from outside that actually understand most of these problems have been solved. It may have a different name on it, but they've been solved. We don't have to keep resolving it. And if we have the audacity to recognize that to be like other markets, we have to be like other markets. And what's different, the strategic elements, the how we handle specifics, the things that make us unique, that's great. But the rest of it, we can accelerate this at a ridiculous speed. We could go from what's almost 19th century, let's say 1980s. But we can make it into the 21st century to now within 3 years. It's not hard, it's there. The problem is people don't have that vision, or they're afraid to recognize that, yeah, it is kind of the same. I'll give it a new label, a new name, I'll describe it in the same language that you use, that's fine. But we can get there, we can get there incredibly quickly. But we need to attract people that know that can do that can move in that way. And we're talking about different things. From a product or front end standpoint, I totally agree with your strategies. Smart, brilliant, thoughtful. But when I talk to Annika, it's like, you should be the best practices for the entire industry. There is no reason, there don't need to be 3 or 5 or 9 competing companies doing, conservation reports. That's insane. Like, there's one way, maybe there's 2 ways. That's all you need. It's not strategic, but it's essential. And I think there's enough of this out here. We just have to recognize it's essential. Find people moving forward. If you want to regulate a bit more, if you want to make sure the pricing is set so it's not predatory, totally makes sense. But we have to think about this stuff differently because we can think 5, 7, 10 years into the future, and we have to architect it. And if it's data, and I'm a data architect by training, you don't think what you're going to collect later on. You map it out from the beginning and you collect everything you can, right from day one. Everything. And you want to organize it in such a way that you can continue to use it. And I know this because, in the full industry, I was collecting data, and my operations people was like, oh, that's going to be too expensive, and it's going to cost me 3 more seconds per person. I'm like, shut up, we're collecting the data. 5 years later, we knew everything about the quality of cut flowers everywhere in the supply chain. And I knew that's what we were doing, but I couldn't convince them. But once they realized that, we didn't relitigate that issue, right? But people become very myopic in how they think about this stuff, and we need to have people, and I'm just one, I'm one little guy trying to make a difference, on this back end and help this move forward, because I love the industry, right? I hate it and I love it at the same time. It's a weird addiction. But I think there's more of us like that, and this is where, companies like an insurance company knows how the rest of the world works, and you know how dysfunctional elements of this are. And there's enough of us that can look, it doesn't have to be dysfunctional. There's a way we can solve that. We can solve it pretty quickly. And most of it's data, and most of it's structured data, and most of it has to do with trust, and putting yourself where you don't have a conflict of interest so you can't be trusted with data. There's these things that can be done, and that's why I say, first principle says, what are the problems? Technology can solve most of them. And then, where do you want to be? The insurance side of your business could be much bigger. If we grow the market, it could be even bigger. It could be faster. Most of it could be automated. There's lots of amazing tools that we could develop for you to make it not just a bespoke, we've always done it this way, and, I wear my ascot, and, it's all relationships. It's like, yeah, but no.
Well, I'm going to have to come back on that. Okay. So I think, so from my perspective as, someone representing a big corporate who, could make an investment in this space, I think what I've seen over the last sort of 8 years of kind of getting involved in art technology, trying to talk to as many people as possible, is that there is a huge amount of effort going on in a lot of different places. And there is, and one of the reasons why we involve ourselves in this conference and one of the points of this conference is, I guess, to try and foster greater collaboration between all of the businesses like yours that at the moment are maybe collaborating here and there, but are essentially kind of producing lots of different platforms with lots of different data output. None of those represent a complete ecosystem, which kind of captures everything within it, that then produces data that shows a full picture. There's just lots of data coming from lots of different places.
So that was our biggest pivot, to say, okay, we'll be that central point. Just plug into us. We'll focus on all the integration side. We'll worry less about massaging data or fixing the data. We'll leave that to people, whether people start K or, we were focused on condition reports. But when I met Annika, she's the only person in the world that can out-talk me and convince me that she was better than me at it. So, we integrated data, right? But that's how this can work. And we'll do it, and maybe some other, but it's almost like an ERP model where you have a central, system that everybody can be working on. And in that same way, we can then integrate with SAP or Oracle or whoever else. And then it makes it very easy to take on any new technology. There's a single path, test it, bring it on, but it's going to follow the same process, the same data standards, the same whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think, this would have been a far faster process, I think, if there had been a kind of prevailing piece of software out there that was being used by everybody, and then you could coalesce various other services around that. There's been no kind of central foundation stone for everything that's gone on in the art space.
Doesn't that also have to do with trust, though? Does anyone remember Collectrium, for example? Bought by Christie's, And then everyone said, no thanks, I don't want Christie's to have my data, and they went under within, I don't know, a couple of years.
But that to me is a conflict of interest, right? I'm not going to give my data to somebody that's competing with me.
Right, but I guess my point is that they, to date, at that point, achieved the biggest exit of any art tech startup, which was like 15 million, wasn't much at all by most people's standards. And you know, we don't have an example of what you're talking about. I appreciate that that's what you're trying to build, and I think it's fantastic, and I want to be part of that story, and I want to do that. But both of our companies have been hamstrung by, you know, a lack of proper investment, and we're not alone. I think every art tech company can say that, and but it's not just that. It's also, if there even was a company that was out there that was well funded, would everybody use it? Probably not, if we're being frank, because people don't tend to trust one company holding the keys to the castle in this industry.
I mean, it depends on what the incentives are for using that. So I think if you build something sufficiently kind of usable and that solves enough problems, then people are going to use it and put their reservations to one side. I'm going to have to, I'm afraid, stop here.
Can I say
you got one last word,
yeah,
Curtis?
from a consolidation standpoint, pre-Y2K, there were about 100 ERP systems that existed. And there was an event, you know, it wasn't moonshot, it was more like, you know, asteroid, was Y2K. So everybody had to upgrade systems because they thought everything would die. And within about 8 years, there were 3 left. They got bought up by Oracle, SAP, and Microsoft. And that's it now. But that was a consolidation on the infrastructure side, but it started being distributed like it is now, and then it got consolidated. But there was money there because it was across multiple industries. A very similar thing can happen here, but we just have to sort of see it that same way.
Thank you. And this has been such an interesting conversation. It's a shame to cut it short, but we're fully out of time now, and I don't want anyone sort of burning their lips on their coffee. So thank you to all of my panelists, and please, if anyone has any questions, sorry, obviously we don't have time for those now, but you will have the coffee break to personally assail anyone to whom you wish to talk. Thank you very much.
Rian will speak now, I think.
Thank you so much.